This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Welcome, Talk Catholic, the website.com, your host, Tim Kilcoyne. No agendas here, just the straight and narrow, through Mary to Jesus, the Catholic faith proclaimed and preserved. Hope to see you here every week. Talk Catholic with Tim Kilcoyne in summertime still. I hope you're getting that vacation in. This was always the time of our family's vacation, and boy, am I ever grateful that Mom and Dad, they spent some serious deliberation in putting together the family vacation, and it constitutes some of my very finest memories and inspired a movement on my part to the very place of those childhood memories when they departed. Happy childhood times, I believe, prove salvific, if you remember. I urge parents, please get away, whether it be the lakes, the mountains, the ocean. At some point, these could be the best memories of your child's life. In any event, I'm just finishing up a movie which I highly recommend always, Constantine and the Sword. It's an oldie but goodie, and if it's good for all time. Those dark days of the first 3 centuries that finally came to an end with the conversion of Constantine the Great, who converted to Christianity. Ultimately, his mother, Helena, was a Christian, and he ushered in the time of what was called the Edict of Milan, which granted toleration for all faith traditions. This was an absolute momentous period in Catholic Christian history, and unfortunately, we could go right back to it if we lose sight of who our leaders are and whether they're guiding us towards righteousness. And in these times of the first 3 centuries, you could rest assured that the enemy was on the outside. It was the state, the Roman Empire, and looking at the Christians as pagans themselves, not paying homage to the Roman gods, etc., and to the ultimate god, the emperor. But now, with the third secret of Fatima, ladies and gentlemen, which cannot be forgotten, okay, in the midst of, grid down, power up, check out that video on the internet about the possibility of losing our electricity. The electromagnetic pulse, EMP it's called, at the blink of an eye. We can't count our blessings enough that we have been spared some of these things that are possible and could change everything overnight. And that's why the Fatima message has to be remembered. And part of that message was the third secret. And that, of course, was kept a secret because somebody didn't want the contents divulged, namely our leaders in the church. Because the third secret, no doubt, highlights an apostasy by our clergy who are no longer guiding that flock, no longer teaching the faith. They become part of the world and its ways. And so I was just looking at Raymond Arroyo's podcast just tonight, actually, as they were talking with the papal posse about the new pope. And which way is he going to go? Well, so far, unfortunately, there's been an affirmation of the blessing of same-sex couples and those remarried without annulment also receiving a blessing. This is anathema to the actual Catholic faith. And it is my responsibility as a teacher for our Lord to point it out. And I have that right to do so as a very Catholic teacher. And I highlight this because I want to share with you just a sign of the times and the truths that I've been trying to convey about the Trojan horse. I recently went to, and we will, by the way, get back to Cultural Meltdown with Bill Donahoe in the second half and pick up where we left off last week on critical race theory. But here's the personal anecdotal from Tim for this week. And the climate has been getting darker. I went to confession. That's usually a time of relief. But as a good teacher, my confessions are never the ordinary because I always ask our Lord, how can I be a blessing to the priest by my confession. I have very directly asked our Lord that often. I went to confession with the possible sin. I wasn't quite sure whether I was guilty of hatred, but I was there to basically say to the priest that I'm not too fond of your leadership. In fact, I kind of despise it, staying mute about all the issues that matter to the sustenance of family life, namely the Ten Commandments, and only highlighting climate change and New World Order policies like immigration, et cetera, et cetera. Oh boy. Now, did I not have the right to simply speak my heart that this is how I'm feeling, and if it borders on hatred, I am deeply sorrowful? And I meant that. And that's in the sacred confines of my heart under the Lord. Well, let's just say my words weren't appreciated. Because I ticked off the priest to no end, he just teed off. No pun intended on this golf pro. He just teed off on me about, the arrogance, the lack of humility to state such a thing, like I know better. And, I had to exercise extreme discipline and temperance in the confessional for our Lord to keep some elementary decorum of peacefulness. But I could have given the lecture of a lifetime. After 35 years of ministry experience and a couple of degrees in theology equal to what they have, I think I know what I'm talking about. I know so well what I'm talking about a lack of leadership, on the part of our fathers, and I'm under obligation equal to them to impart the truths of the Catholic faith. And I try to do so right here every Saturday as well as I possibly can, and have over many years at virtually every level of ministry, from high school to adult ed, faith formation, et cetera, et cetera. And thus, what was happening was that because what I was saying rubbed up against his agenda, manifested by company man angry defensiveness, that they have the right to say nothing, then somehow I was the boogeyman. I was the problem. I just tried, like I said, to try to keep my temper, which had every right to blast to the moon. But nevertheless, I was seeking absolution. I was being sincere in my confession. I'm sorry, it almost ended up, and in fact, at one point in the confession, he called me father. So I think it was, I don't know if the cathartic slip of, but somehow the confessional, kind of turned around. And I say that humbly, it'd be an honor. But nevertheless, I did have to kick in Tim the teacher. This is what we're dealing with. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear any criticism of any kind relative to their leadership. That's called tyranny, ladies and gentlemen. It's also called heresy. And according to Cardinal St. Robert Bellarmine, it's grounds for self-excommunication. They're no longer believing with supernatural faith in exactly what the church calls for on the part of her leadership. On the part of their priesthood, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Needless to say, carries with it the onus of responsibility to point out the way, not in abstract generalities of 2,000 years ago, but in concrete situations that we face every day today. We're living our life right here and now. We need guidance. And I just did recently a whole encyclical letter by Pope Pius X. Oh, how dare I bring his name up of 100 years ago? That's all antiquated stuff. No, he spoke with magisterial authority about the importance of addressing real issues from the pulpit. I thankfully shifted gears and turned to other sins, so ultimately I did receive absolution, but boy, was it begrudgingly. Well, to be bluntly honest, before I went into and this is not the first time that I've confessed this particular sin. A guy like me in my position, I'll be confessing it, I'm sure, again and again and again until the warning. But it was interesting. There was 3 times when when I shared this. And there was another priest who never spoke to me ever again. Question there would be, was he using his memory of the confession to use against me? That could be excommunication also by himself. Perhaps never formally recognized or noticed by church authorities, except for one most important church authority, God himself. That's what the canon law says. They can't act on what they hear in the confessional. And then finally, there was another retired priest, and I often do well with them, at least. They're beyond the politics. And you could tell he was right with me. And he just said, just say a prayer as to why try to understand why they are the way they are. Okay, that's fair enough. But he at least didn't deny my right to speak. I'm thinking of a speech recently by Tucker Carlson, and he was going right after this. Whenever anybody takes that position that you don't even, of course you're a racist, remember, when they don't like to hear what there's got to be some kind of racial stuff brewing behind the scenes. But this is their cunning way of just shutting down free speech. You don't have the right to speak and lend that which is your experience, which gets us right back to Constantine and the sword in the first 3 centuries. But these are the times in which we're in right now. This is wickedness. This really is. And it's in the church. And we got to stop with the Pollyanna rose-colored glasses that it ain't this way. No, it is this way. It's been this way for a very long time. It requires that bishops fire people. Just like the deep state, we have the deep church. And if you leave it intact, you get a divided house. And all you have to do is look at what happened to John Henry Weston, one of the greatest voices for truth in the church at the current time. And he got the boot. Thankfully, he was reinstated. But can you imagine getting kicked out of the apostolate that he built? All right? How about that for Judas betrayal? And I chatted with John, and it had an effect on his family as well. And John said on a particular show recently on the internet, he said just what I've been saying all along for many, many, many years. The culture of scandal and sin is the way it is because of the church. The church's leadership. Remember, where's the power? Where's the moral power? Well, it's our Lord and his shepherds. And if those shepherds have gone astray, I've said it so many times, I'm sure you've heard me, it's lights out in the culture at large. So it's not that the culture went wicked first. No, it's the sanctuary. And the devil attacks where the power is. He doesn't waste time with the peripheral. So we got to pray for them, and we got to try to be leaven for them, but we can't be afraid of them. And this is kind of for those of us that are a little on the verbal side that have to speak up. Just tonight, actually, I had to say a couple of my 2 cents about, I think I mentioned this, a rosary group that has been just knocked out of the box, likely by one person who didn't want them to say the rosary at the time that she was there for adoration. And this was a long-standing tradition in this particular parish. And all I said to the priest was, this seems to be as easy as just having a little compromise and ask, well, what hour can we do? Because adoration goes all day long. Is there any compromise here? If that particular person has to come at 7 p.m., okay, then can we shift to 5 p.m.? That's all that's really required. A little dialogue. Remember that word in the modern parlance? There was no dialogue. It was told to me that it was in the bulletin. All of a sudden, the rosary group's no longer meeting on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Done deal. The squeaky wheel got the grease. So I just simply spoke up and, here we go. We got the company man defensiveness, and he got angry. Okay? No. Listen to your own words about synodality. All right? Can we be synodal and a little civil and have a little conversation of disagreement at the table? Is that no longer the church? There's no place for that? Again, this is called tyranny and heresy. So, got to just tell it like it is, right here at WQPH Radio 89.3 FM. And I ask for your prayers when somebody in my position who is under responsibility to speak the truth, the whole truth, and absolutely nothing but the truth, most especially in the church. And I'm not going to be derailed and intimidated by angry types from the 1970s, all right? I know who these people are. I've told you 100 times. They're my colleagues of the 1970s, and they're in total control of the church, and that was the rebellious time of theology. And I've said to you also, I've got all the books to prove it right in my own house. Not one of them was faithful to the magisterium of the Catholic Church. I can back that up. So, back me up. And we'll back up Bill Donohue on the other side. Cultural meltdown coming your way. Well, in our last session, Bill has been basically laying out the groundwork that leads to critical race theory. And beware as students get ready to go back to school, just because there's been a change in the administration politically, doesn't mean that CRT is out of the school curricula. So let's listen to Bill very carefully. He's talking very positively about the progress that was made historically with the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Dr. Martin Luther King's work. And then as it moved towards affirmative action, there was this next step towards equality of results that President Lyndon Baines Johnson wanted to see, that it wasn't enough just to get the person in there, Title IX, etc., but we want them to just take someone else's job, even though the other person has greater merit, qualifications, etc. Now we're discriminating in an opposite way, and thus Title IX had to be knocked down, affirmative action. And all of this has basically been the manifestation of what he calls a radical egalitarianism, and that's where we're going to pick up today. And I'm also just reminded, I was looking at a talk by Tucker Carlson recently to a Young People's Summit meeting, I believe it was in Florida, and he was talking about this strategy of using racism for everything. When you disagree with a person over anything they don't like, that's it. You're a racist. Now you got to shut the conversation down. There'll be no debate. You're just a really hate-filled person for simply disagreeing. And that is the sign of a tyranny. That is the sign of a kind of fascism, where the denial of free speech to simply present who you are and what your experiences have been. You can rest assured every dictator in history has done the same. They don't want to hear you. So that's why we got to really look carefully at some of these theories that are ever so novel in recent years, and CRT being one of them. Bill says, goals like equal opportunity, even equal results, seem quaint given the current onslaught of critical race theory. Ostensibly formulated to combat racism, this doctrine insists that all white people are inherently racist. And as a result, it is inherently racist itself, and it smacks of the radical secular agenda. The Catholic Church has long rejected radical egalitarianism, i.e., everybody is equal across the board, the communist playbook. Bill says, in 1884, Pope Leo XIII maintained that while all men have had a common origin in nature, they were not equal in terms of their abilities. That is why attempts to mandate complete equality, quote unquote, he said, were repugnant to reason. Critical race theory vehemently rejects the Pope's views. CRT holds that the only way to correct past discrimination against blacks is to practice current and future discrimination against whites. In other words, CRT effectively dismisses the rights of the individual, maintaining that even though white people today are in no way responsible for slavery and Jim Crow, they should be discriminated against because they belong to a group that once was. This idea is profoundly at odds with Catholic social ethics, and it is plainly and emphatically un-American. Moreover, from a Catholic perspective, CRT is hopefully divisive, and it undercuts the age-old quest for unity in the common good. It must be stressed, too, that divisiveness is not an unanticipated consequence of CRT. It is central to its ideology. The divisive and damaging force of CRT is really apparent when it is applied in real-life circumstances. When the State University of New York at Albany enacted a library internship program that formally excluded white students, it triggered a complaint by the Equal Protection Project. The internship offered $1,500 scholarships and up to $11,500 in stipends to Black graduates of Master Library and Information Science or Master of Science in Information Systems. The program was launched in 2020, 3 years before a federal civil rights complaint was made. SUNY Albany defended the program in the name of diversity. Texas A&M set aside $2 million in 2022 to be spent on bonuses to attract faculty of color, quote unquote. Some were awarded $100,000. Not only were white students told they could not apply, but Asians were told they couldn't either. The University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, which had its affirmative action admissions program shut down by the Supreme Court, instituted a fellowship for exploring research in nutrition that explicitly excluded white applicants. Fellows earned thousands of dollars and were housed in on-campus apartments paid for by the university. They also received generous mentorship opportunities, including letters of recommendation. CRT is being taught in the U.S. Air Force Academy, West Point, the U.S. Naval Academy, the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. Well, hopefully this is not the case at the current time. And in fact, that would be evidenced by the skyrocketing recruitment rates that have been ongoing since, shall we call it, patriotism returning to America in recent months? Interesting. It's being eradicated from these institutions, but that's where it was going, that's for sure, before the political shift last fall. The elite medical schools are on board too, as is the American College of Surgeons. This new kind of racism, and that is what it is being tolerated and promoted by people who have allowed their compassion to create a new form of injustice. Welcome to the world of the new apartheid. The much condemned South African practice of separating the races is now very much accepted in the United States. It is not the average American who likes segregating whites and blacks. It is the ruling class. The elites who run our institutions are the champions of the new apartheid. Militant secularism is driving much of the segregation. Christianity emphasizes the fact that all people are equal before God. But the same people bloviating about white supremacy are the ones attacking Christian privilege. The campuses are now dotted with classes, workshops, and lectures on this subject. At George Washington University, diversity workshops teach that Christians enjoy a privileged, easier life than their non-Christian counterparts, and that Christians possess built-in advantages today. At one university that has one of the most extensive diversity programs in the nation, students were required in some classes to list their identities. One student was instructed to list himself as a white heterosexual Catholic male. To what end? The point of the assignment, everyone knew, was to shame him. Another student, a female, said that her professor was known for going off on white privilege and systemic racism, and that if any students disagreed with him, their grades would suffer. In fact, she wrote a paper defending Christianity as an institution that helped to end slavery. She received an F. The diversity, equity, and inclusion gurus on campus have training programs where participants learn the 4 expressions of quote-unquote religious oppression, all of which blame white Christians for oppressing everyone else. The proponents of this left-wing agenda talk of Christian privilege, which is the view that Christian beliefs, language, and practices do not require any special effort to be recognized as they are embedded into the U.S. American culture. They decry the celebration of Christmas as a mark of Christian hegemony. Leaving aside the fact that there is no such thing as a Christian language, why should it be considered controversial for a nation founded by Christians to celebrate its history? Countries founded by Jews, Hindus, and Muslims celebrate their holy days. None of this has anything to do with the most important goal for which higher education is intended, namely the pursuit of truth. It has everything to do with thought control, with dividing individuals according to group characteristics. Not surprisingly, campus diversity programs have utterly failed at their purported goal of improving relationships between groups. Another divisive goal pushed by the left is reparations. The purpose of reparations is supposedly to make up for past inequities that stopped blacks from making economic progress, but it primarily serves the power politics of grievance. Well, why don't we pause right there, because the agenda just goes on and on and on if we let it. In the past, I've referred to teaching the unit on racism from a social justice textbook for high schoolers back in 1990 on the West Coast. And I asked the students, and they were mostly whites and Mexicans, should we skip this chapter? And wholeheartedly, unanimously, all hands went up because we were all of agreement that when we stop talking about this stuff, we might actually make some progress. But who is it that tried to stir up the bee's hive over the last 15 years or so? I won't go there. I think you know that these people are of the political left, happen to run those universities most especially, and happen to be politicians for sure. These are a deeply minority group, and they're doing terrible damage to try to turn the clocks back to the Civil War days. We won't go there. It's all forward and onward with us here at WQPH Radio 89.3 FM. Have a great week, everyone. To the beach, my home. Great time to consider a donation to this wonderful radio station. Check out our upcoming fundraiser for October 3rd. Go to WQPHradio.org. Let your light shine. That is what it's all about here at WQPH Radio 89.3 FM. But we need to hear your story. You want your voice to be his voice. That is making the faith known to others. Please, my number is 877-625-3727. Tim Kilcoyne, TalkCatholic.com. St. Mother Teresa told us, your ministry is your work right where you are. Grab on to this microphone. God bless.